What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Art Uncovered. In this week's episode, I spoke with Diana Puglisi, an interdisciplinary artist and educator whose work transforms and recontextualizes objects associated with women's work. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Diana's current research into women's health and the work she produced immediately following the birth of her first child, what she refers to as the fourth trimester. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so honored to be here with Diana Jean Puglisi. Diana, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me as well. So, Diana, to start the conversation, I'm wondering if we could talk a bit about your current research. So you wrote me that you are researching women's healthcare, primarily thyroid issues that seem to affect women more than men. Yeah, so to start, I'm wondering if you could tell me what you know about these issues.
Sure. I unfortunately know a lot about it. While I was pregnant, I was diagnosed with a autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's, and then I actually have the other autoimmune disease called Graves' disease, and they're kind of this interchangeable thing that can happen to women. And what I discovered was it was actually prevalent before I was pregnant in my blood work, and it wasn't treated. So that was.
Did you know you had it beforehand?
I didn't. I didn't.
Okay.
So
But
once, but the doctors should have seen it. So it was
Awesome.
kind of coming and going.
Okay.
So from that, I started to become really interested in the fact that we're not as focused in this culture on preventative care. We're more focused on this diagnostic care. You have this thing and then you treat it with a medicine or whatever it may be. So then with thyroid diseases, the reason why it's disproportionately affecting women is largely unknown. Doctors don't know why. It's hinted and hypothesized that it could be because of estrogen levels. And then with Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, they just test for these two kind of antibodies, and they like put you in either the Hashimoto's camp or the Graves' camp. And really, the thyroid diseases are so nuanced, and I feel like healthcare isn't, or doctors, healthcare research, whatever it may be, aren't keeping up with what's happening to women. And right now, levothyroxine, which is the synthetic form, it's a synthetic hormone that's given to people that have slow thyroids, underactive thyroids. And that's the number one most prescribed drug in the United States as of 2023.
Before you go forward, can we just clarify? Yeah. So what does the thyroid do? What is it responsible for in the human body?
It's responsible for regulating the hormones in your body, and it sends a signal to your brain and pituitary gland. So it's really connected to everything in the body, to ovulation, your menstruation, everything really in the female body is regulated by the hormones that pass through the thyroid or created by the thyroid. So it's a really under talked about gland organ that I feel like needs more research. It's clearly affecting so many women in this country, and the number seems to have jumped, and it's interesting. Does it have anything to do with environmental causes? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah, and I'm curious because men have thyroids also, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is that affecting their like level of testosterone?
I don't know. I'm not so deep in. That's a good thing to say, though. I should do some research on that.
Yeah,
I'm not deep into how it's affecting men, but it's far less than it's affecting women.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm wondering if there's some like more stigma associated with the female hormones versus the male hormones, and if that's maybe why it's under researched or something like this. But really interesting. So, okay, so you're doing this research. It was something that you have recently had experience with. Now, my understanding is that the work related to this research is currently in production. And we had a really interesting kind of brief talk before we hit record about where you are in your practice in regards to research versus the making. So can you talk a little bit about maybe this kind of, I don't know if pause in production is the right phrase to use, but kind of where you are in terms of your studio practice?
So I'm in the thinking process. I feel like I really decided more so recently that I need to focus on the research of this work so that I can figure out its form. Whereas previously I was working through the forms and then it was coming to me after the fact. And for me, for a long time, I felt like I needed to produce. And as we were talking about, like, coming out of a graduate program, you always feel like you need to produce this work and be constant. And that was actually, it was hard for me because I felt like I was like, oh my God, I'm not making anything. I haven't made anything for a couple months now. But really, to make what I want to make, I needed to do this research. And I'm really excited about what's kind of coming through that in terms of drawings and writing that I'm doing. It really feels closer to the cause that I want to talk about. Whereas, like I said previously, I was working a little bit more abstractly, and I see the works now going to a place that's a little bit more literal. So that's where I am right now. And I'm about to start, I'm always making things, really material studies, and I'm doing that right now in the form of these like fig leaves or something that's been in my practice for a while too. They're
Yeah, and
like
I'm just going to
molds
pause
from,
you there for a
yep.
second to let listeners know. So if you are listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like this, we are now on YouTube. So we're actually recording the visuals of this conversation. And Diana just picked up a piece of artwork. So if you're interested in learning what what her art objects look like, check us out on YouTube. If you just search Art Uncovered podcast on YouTube, you'll find us there, and then you could watch and get a better understanding of what her work looks like. Okay, so you were just holding up an object. So this is
They're fig
okay.
leaves.
Okay.
They're casted
Oh, they're
from
huge. I didn't know fig
actually,
leaves were that big.
yeah, these are casted from a tree that I have in my backyard. And
Wow,
then some
cool.
of them are actually casted from my grandfather's fig leaf tree in Queens that no longer exists. I took those cast years ago, and it's kind of resurfaced.
Cool.
A
Very
lot
cool.
of things in my work um, are from my childhood or memories from my childhood that then resurface and become now and are still integrated into my life somehow. So those, I'm still working with those material studies, but I'm also now trying to figure out, okay, now how does this little fig leaf or how does this cameo pin that was my grandmother's that I never met
Oh, very
now
cool.
integrate itself into the language of talking about the thyroid, talking also about the throat, talking about the female body, and to get across the point that we're talking about these diseases that disproportionately affect women or birth or the functionality of women's bodies that are, I feel like sometimes not as that well known, like even to us. I mean, I've talked to so many people that have said to me, what do you mean pregnancy starts the at the end of your cycle and you're not actually pregnant for the first 2 weeks and it counts towards your pregnancy? What does that even mean?
I
And
didn't
these are
know that.
women
Wow.
saying this because we don't learn this until we're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like that's part of my work too, is like uncovering and unveiling these things that should just be commonly known.
Yeah. I'd like to maybe ask a follow-up question. So you said that it was a comment about graduate school, and I like talking about graduate school on this podcast for people who are either in the, who are currently in programs or are thinking of going into programs. And I know we were talking off air about the pressure that, and this isn't for everyone, but for both of us, it seems, we share this, that there is a large focus on producing, making, and not a lot of time for reflection and research, even though they do encourage research. But anyway, so I'm curious if you could kind of talk about that struggle and what it's like for you now that you're post graduation, what it's like for you to have taken that pause in making to spend time on, researching, also having a baby and
Right.
feeding yourself and all the other
Having a
things that go
full-time
into
job,
it.
all the things that come with
All
it.
the
So I'm
things.
8 years, which is crazy,
Yeah.
postgraduate, and I still feel like some of those okay, let's not call them scars. Some of those pressures, some
call
of
them
those
scars.
pressures, they're scars. I have some scars from it. Pressures from graduate school have been like in my psyche, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not making anything, and then I panic about it, and I'm like, it's been how many months? Like, and I'm like, no, but I made a material study. I'm fine. But then I realized, oh my God, this is ridiculous, Diana. Your process is you research this. It's been like this for years. I've just recently accepted it and stopped getting upset about it. Like artists are like, oh my God, I haven't made anything. I'm upset about it. I feel like a bad artist, even though I know
And
I'm
all
not
the
a bad
self-imposed
artist.
guilt that
Right.
we.
That's what I hate, that
Goodness.
feeling. I'm like, I need to rid myself of that. Like, you
Yeah.
just need to go on your trajectory. And also something that I feel like with younger artists that I always say is your path is a different path. Do not be comparative. Just go on your path. And that's how I feel. That's what I feel like I've actually accepted my own advice somewhat recently. So it's like I research, and then there is like a 3-month period typically, or 2 to 3 to 4 months, where I just like spit out the work. So it feels weird that it's broken up like that, but I feel like I'm obsessed with researching a point, and then I'm obsessed with the making of the thing, and then the cycle starts all over again. And then I'm questioning the work, writing about the work, and then I'm back to that point A of research again and feeling guilty and whatever it is. And then I'm making the work again. So that's really been my process postgraduate school. And maybe it's because the time restraints that I have in my life that I needed to adjust it. But when I make that work from the process, it always feels good. And I don't think you do have to work to make the work work, but I don't think your best work is always made just by making work. I feel like thinking is such a part of it. It's like a huge part of it.
And I also think not feeling guilty about that time that you can't work. I don't think that's going to help the work at all. I think
No.
guilt very rarely helps. And I know it's so much easier said than done, but yeah, listeners, if any of you are going through grad school right now, just know that there is life after graduate school.
It's okay.
It is okay.
You will make it.
You will. So there was something else I would like to pull out of your earlier response. You mentioned something about your grandfather, that you made this kind of material study from a tree that was in the yard of a grandfather. Was it a grandfather you never met?
No, my grandfather Dida, his name was, he was Croatian.
Okay.
I met him and I had a really strong relationship with him. He
Ah,
died in his
okay.
90s. I was
Okay.
fortunate to have him. Yeah.
Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
a lot of things in that I cast are things that were taken years ago from their house.
I see. Yeah, and I'm curious, I kind of want to stay on maybe this familial trajectory a little bit because your middle name, I actually just learned, so Diana Jean Puglisi, your middle name was not given to you at birth. It was something that you took for yourself, and was that the name of your grandmother that you never met?
That was my dad's mother's name was Jean.
Yeah, and I'm curious maybe if you could talk a bit about your references to grandparents, because there was also a reference to your grandmother's, was she a quilter or a sewer or something
Lace.
like
She made
this?
lace. Yeah,
Yeah,
she was a
yeah,
seamstress. Both of my
yeah.
grandmothers were seamstress, but she was a lace maker, Croatian
Okay.
lace maker.
Yeah, and can you talk about how maybe that first of all, that's so cool, a lace maker, that's awesome. Can you talk a bit about how you were inspired by their work, and then maybe more broadly, we could talk about how you're interested in, I don't know if it's the right word to use, but kind of feminine work, right? Like sewing, crocheting,
Right.
lace making,
Women's work with I'm
women's
doing
work,
big
totally.
quotes for
Yeah,
those that are listening.
air quotes.
Um, so my grandmother, Jean, I never met. She passed away young. And she was a seamstress, and all my whole life I heard from my father about her that she was so creative and she always drew, and she would make a story that he told us was she made this game. They didn't have a lot of money. They were living in Brooklyn and Sheepshead Bay. And my grandmother made this game that was down in Coney Island or a festival because she wanted to win this piece of furniture. So like she was always a creative maker, sculptor, and that's what I know of her. And everyone always says to me, that's where your creativity came from. So I take that, which there's other creative aspects from in my lineage, but like I always held that really dear to me. And the only thing that I have of hers is this cameo pin. That is the only thing that, and this is a whole
Can you
nother
hold it up
story of,
to the camera
this
a
is
little
not, well, I have the real one. This is a
Oh yeah,
cast,
I would love to
but
see
then
it.
this is the real one.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, so and this wasn't even given to me or found until many years after she passed away.
Wow.
So recently, probably within the last 15 years or
Yeah.
so.
Do you know anything
So it's,
about cameo pins? So, listeners, if you don't know what that is by language, I'm sure you've seen them in like antique stores. They're pins that women would wear on their blouses, and it's often a like a it almost looks like white porcelain portrait of a woman, and then kind of a was it like a sienna
it's a
colored
seashell.
background?
It's carved, some of them, this one's carved out of a seashell, but
Okay.
they're made out of different things. Ivory seashells now, like they make them out of plastic now and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, 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 yeah. Do you know anything about the history of those?
I do. So
Yeah.
cameo pins, something I found that was really interesting that I was like, oh, that makes sense in my work. I really focus a lot on protection too. And the cameo pin was used to like ward off evil spirits. And it was something that women would also like put at their throat during the plague I was reading. There was like a lot of different things that I was like, wow. When I first started using it, it was also during the pandemic. So I was like, wow, this feels really poignant for me
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's a long history of it with status also. So if you had a cameo pin, it was like a status thing. You were a wealthy woman.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're just used more so decoratively
Mm.
to
And
decorate.
you said that you're kind of interested in this idea of protection. I think that's an interesting connection to when we first started talking and how a lot of medicine nowadays is less to protect and prevent women. It's more so used for diagnostic purposes, which I think is a really interesting connection between this really personal work and then work that's kind of talking about women's healthcare in general.
Yeah,
Uh,
like protect ourselves, protect our the rights, protect. There's a lot in my work. It's
mm,
like always points back to this idea to protect. And in the materials, a lot of the time that I'm using too, like clothes protect the body, interfacing protects the body. Um, the even pointing to the body, like with the fig leaf, it was a mode of like censorship too for many years, and it was
oh,
protecting that. Yeah, so like all of those, it always goes back for some reason over all of these years that I've been working to disease protection, birth, and death. And I
mm,
feel like those are like my four core themes in my work.
mhm.
um to back to lace for a second. So
Yeah, please.
my grandmother, Croatian grandmother, Baba, um, she she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease pretty early, in her late 60s. So I knew her and was close to her, but mostly what I knew of her as I was getting older was her being sick. And I heard all of these stories about her sewing and making lace. And I recall sewing with her and kind of going through button bins and all of these things. And that's like where I go when I start to make in my studio, to that playful place, because I have that point. But in that work that I made in like 2011 to like 2000
What's the
and
name of this body of work? I'd like to do a screen
the
share
name of
of
this
it.
body of work, so it crosses, it bridges over the
Okay.
work. So 2011, um
So if I go to work on your
so
website
if you go
here.
to memory drawings, it's partly in there.
Okay.
And then in installations, the wall drawings, and the wall drawings.
Am I in the right place or should I
You're
go
in the
back?
right place and then
Okay.
pop out of there. Yeah, so now it's coming up. So that's scanned, actually her lace scanned.
Oh, look
That's
at this.
then put into a program, manipulated, and then laser cut.
Okay.
So I was using the laser cutter to draw at this point. But a lot of that work in its reiteration, since I didn't know how to make lace and that language was lost through me not being able to learn it from her, I was trying to rediscover it in new ways. So it was in tandem to dealing with her being sick and her memory being depleted and her losing her memory. So I was really in that point because I was a caregiver with my mother, to thinking about like, look at this disease that also has little research. And I don't know if it disproportionately affects women over men. That's something I should research. But look at this disease. It's really like everyone thinks of it as like it's killing the memory, but really it's a growth in the body that's just like taking over the brain. So what I was doing at that time was taking lace, figuring out how to do it in my own way and language so that I could still kind of use her language and amplify her voice through me. So a lot of the work I was doing was performative in that way, I felt.
When you say performative, do you mean yeah, maybe can you explain what you mean by performative?
Yeah, so I was also at that time I was at Virginia Commonwealth University, and there were a few performances that I did where I veiled that I don't have documentation of, sadly.
Okay.
That I veiled myself with these lace sheets that I was making from the
Ah.
laser cutter.
Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. We just want to take a quick break here to make a few announcements. First, we're excited to announce that we are now on YouTube. So if you're listening to this episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like this, and if you're curious to have some visuals of myself, my guests, and their work, head over to Art Uncovered Podcast on YouTube. Also, we are now officially a 501c nonprofit platform. So if you'd like to ensure the continuation of this podcast, please donate. Any amount that you can contribute will be very much appreciated. You could donate on our website at artuncoveredpodcast.com. And that's it for the announcements. We will now continue with my conversation with Diana Jean Puglisi. I'm going to do another screen share here to showcase some work that is a little bit more recent. Let me see, go here. So I definitely still see the reference to sewing, and it looks like knitting or crocheting also here. So what's going on here? So I'm seeing these look very sculptural, quite different than the lace drawings that we were just looking at. So they look to me like knit sculptures. One looks almost like a knit pedestal with some kind of velvet type of pillow on top with looks like there's some kind of glitter aspect to it also. So it feels very feminine, and even the palette that you use is a lot of pinks and whites and purples. So yeah, I wonder if you could tell us what are we looking at here? And this body of work is called Femme Body Cushions. Began in 2001 or 2021.
So
Sorry.
2021
Yeah.
there's some work that's done through 2023. So I'm
Okay.
really slowly working here because I'm trying to figure out how to crochet, how to do these different skills that I didn't have the skill prior to. So the bottom base of this is actually interfacing. So I've been using interfacing in my practice since like 2011, and
And what is
interfacing is the stuff. Yeah.
Makes it hard,
Interfacing.
right?
Yeah, it can be all different weights. So when you think about paper having different weights, interfacing can have different weights too. And here, this is a really heavy weight interfacing that's really has a lot of structure. And what I did was I cut it into yarn and I crocheted this pedestal out of it. So it holds its, I like to try and make fabric do things it's not supposed to do. So it holds its form as like that kind of spinal shape at the bottom.
Yeah, and
Just
just to
through crochet,
clarify
it makes
for
it stronger.
yeah, just to clarify for listeners who don't know the language of sewing or textiles, so interfacing is basically if you have fabric, you adhere the interfacing oftentimes through heat to fabric to make it stiff. So if you think of like the collars of men's shirts that are really like have a bit of structure to it, that's interfacing that was somehow fused to fabric to give it rigidity. So what you did here is you made the base of this sculpture out of interfacing.
Yes, the base is
Okay.
made out of rigid interfacing that would be used for the inside of a coat or for a woman's purse.
Okay, got it.
Um, and then the top is a stuffed cushion made out of crushed velvet, and then the different crochet, it's yarn that it's crocheted with there. So this piece in particular, during this time, I was actually trying to have a child, and I was talking with a lot of my friends and people around me that were in the similar boat, and I kept on like thinking about like how this one little thing just keeps on getting multiplied to create a human or body or form. So it's a large pin creating a small pin, creating a small thimble, creating a big thimble, like as you zoom into it. And then it's like the crochet form amplifying into itself. And here too, I was playing a little bit with gender, because it does have like a bulbous form of the female breast. So that's like a protection thing that you feel like the warmth of your mother like laying on her as a pillow. But also at the same time thinking about like the uterus and this like this body becoming open and a skin. And then at the top, I was thinking about like kind of male and female, and looking at different like Shiva lingam forms, which I can get into that a little bit too.
Yeah,
So
I don't know
Shiva,
what this is. What is Shiva Linga form?
okay. So Shiva lingam. So sometimes I look into different religions, and religious history, and
How do you
Shiva
spell it?
lingam,
I'm gonna do it.
Shiva
Uh-huh. G.
Lingam.
Yeah. Okay, so what
So
are
they're
these?
So they're like in Hinduism, there are these shrines, and when I was in India, I saw them multiple times, and they're kind of these shrines that honor men. They're very phallic
They are very
forms.
phallic looking.
Yeah. So my form that I was making was kind of becoming this like female Shiva lingam in a way. Um,
Oh, brilliant.
And then also thinking about like the Mother Mary, like the form that comes in up in the middle, like we're praying to the Mother Mary for this thing. So a lot of things, because I was raised Roman Catholic, I feel like me and a friend of mine like joke about it. It's like always like ingrained in you, even
It
though
is.
maybe you're not
I went to
practicing
Catholic
it.
school
It's
my whole
like,
life.
yeah. So there's some of that weaves its way into my work too.
Right.
Sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. After the
Mm.
fact, I'll say, hey, I see it. I see it there.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
something that came up in grad school a lot, is that my work looked Catholic for some reason, which I thought was really silly.
And how was that for for people to kind of impose these meanings and then you realize, oh shit, it is actually there.
Yeah, no, I was like, oh, thank you. Finally, this is why I'm doing this thing. It's because
Yeah.
have kind of been taught this, or these symbols or images are just ingrained in my brain, and I'm subconsciously doing it. I mean, I
Mhm.
even think about that with Italian Renaissance paintings. Like I look at my work and I say, oh my God, I'm using velvet and I'm using lace and I'm using these things, or fabrics that were actually made for men that are now considered feminine.
Mm.
There were like these royalty status that, like, when we think of that Napoleon portrait, he's like draped in red velvet or has like a lace collar on. And that whole era was taking these fabrics that I'm using that were masculine and that had been shifted to being
Ah, interesting.
today feminine. So I think
Mhm.
about that a lot too. Like, how has time changed this,
Mhm. There's
or why?
one formal element that I noticed in the work we were just talking about, and also I'll just do a quick screen share here again. Um, And this piece here is also part of that larger body of work. It looks like it's more recent, which is interesting. But I'm noticing like a sense of kind of balance to this. I'm wondering if that's something that you think of.
Definitely. So I worked a lot on the wall. So they were sculptural, but they always depended on the wall. And this series, and I made small sculptures that didn't. But this series was about like, Diana, get off the wall and make some sculpture. Like everybody calls you a sculptor, like do it. And maybe that's another thing that's this weird, like we were talking about earlier with grad school or anything, being between these zones and kind of reconcile where you sit. So I was like, I'm going to make some sculptures. So I was thinking a lot about balance and forms that go upward and also forms that sit on the ground. How pressure points are used to create pressure points are used to create balance and tension, but also how they're actually used against gravity. Like here, this is just that one that you just put up, the sculpture that's in the corner that's pressed by the pin. There's no magic or tricks here. That pin is holding that thing up. Cool. So I was playing a lot with those formal aspects too from minimalism. I think a lot about that in my practice and how I can make these simple moves kind of make the sculptures a little off kilter to make you feel some unease.
So balance is something that I have this really silly goal of being able to hold a handstand in the middle of the room.
Nice.
And I have yeah. And so I think a lot about, or lately I've been thinking a lot about balance and also my own hormone journey, because I am one of these people that I have big fluctuations in my hormones, and trying to find the balance so that I could live a balanced life is really important to how we perceive the world around us as women. So whether or not you know that in your work, but I think there's this really interesting connection between balancing of female hormones and what you mentioned in the very beginning about these thyroid issues that kind of throw our hormones out of whack. So these pieces to me seem like there's like you're searching for that balance that is so important to I don't want to use the blanket term of like being happy, but being happier. Because if you have internal fluctuations in hormones as a woman, life
or just
can get
feeling
messy.
good, just
Yeah,
like feeling
totally.
good and feeling
It is that
not feeling tired.
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
the struggle for me really hard, like is not feeling tired. And I have to say that's kept me from my practice because I my daughter's in daycare. I got sick from like December up until somewhat recently. I just was on and off with colds and viruses, and it messed up my hormones so much. I was just so tired. But I love what you said about balance in my work. No, I wasn't thinking of it that way. I think of balance as this I mean, I think about my own balance in terms of hormonally, but I think of balance in my work so formally that's such an interesting way to start to think about it, to give it this like this the reason why I'm using it, like there's an actual reason, or maybe it's a subconscious reason that I'm doing it similar to the religion thing that was going on. But thank you for that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it seemed like, especially because like the simplicity and the minimal nature of your sculptures, it seems like you're so carefully trying to create this balance that makes everything work. So I think that the labor involved in trying to create that balance is really kind of beautiful also, and subtle. It's really quite remarkable.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I thank you because, I don't know if I ever would have had the confidence to, state my hormone journey on air for anyone to hear. And your work did that. So, keep doing what you're doing.
I
I'm
appreciate
grateful.
that. I'm excited to make the work that I've been thinking about now for so long.
I
And it's
bet.
about to and I'm excited to share it with you and to share
Yeah.
it with everyone here.
Yeah. And so listeners, if you want to keep up with Diana's practice. You could visit her on Instagram. I'm going to include links to her social media accounts and also her website, which is actually a beautiful website. I love the aesthetic of it. So yeah, I'll include all kinds of links. And do you have any, I know you're in the research phase, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is no, but do you have any shows or anything like this coming up?
I do have a show coming up, and it's in Montclair at a gallery called Ria X Gallery,
In
and
Jersey?
that in Jersey,
Okay.
and that opens I'll share the opening date, but as of right now,
Perfect.
it's May 3rd.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so listeners, I'll include all those kinds of details on our social media, Art Uncovered Podcast, and on our website, artuncoveredpodcast.com. All right, Diana, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was, like I said, a wonderful and important conversation, and I thank you and your work for initiating that.
Thank you. I appreciate having this space to do that. And I also really appreciate you for creating opportunities like this for artists. And this really opened my mind to what I was doing in the past, what I'm doing now, and kind of got me thinking. And I really appreciate that.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Be sure to tune in next week as I will be speaking with Harlan Crichton, a Maine-based artist who works with photographic processes. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Harlan's transition from traditional photography to abstract photography and other topics such as storytelling and science fiction. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next week. Bye-bye.